This demonstration will show you how to create a user account in the firewall's local user database, and then how to add that user's account as a firewall administrator account. If the user logs into the firewall, then the firewall will authenticate their account credentials against the account information stored in the firewall's local user database. The firewall can also use the user's credentials to authenticate the user's traffic if it flows through the firewall from one security zone to another. To add a user to the firewall's local user database, we'll browse to Device, Local User Database, Users, and then click Add. The case-sensitive username can contain up to 31 alphanumeric characters and can include hyphens and underscores. And it must be unique within the local user database. We'll type Janet B. Use the mode field to specify how to enter the password. If you select password, then you must enter and confirm a clear text password. We'll use this method and type Palo Alto as the password. The password hash option most commonly is used if you want to reuse the password from a Linux account, but you do not know what the clear text password is. In this scenario, select password hash and then type or copy and paste the hashed password string. The firewall can accept any string up to 63 characters in length, regardless of the algorithm used to generate the hash. We'll go ahead and leave password selected with our Palo Alto password. Leave the enable box selected and click OK to create the user account in the local user database. Notice that Janet B appears in the local user database. Next, we must create an authentication profile that links the user's login name to the authentication service that the firewall will use to authenticate the user's credentials. In this scenario, the authentication service is the local user database running on the firewall itself. To create an authentication profile, browse to Device, Authentication Profiles, and click Add. Type the name of the new profile. We'll type LocalDB Auth Profile. Then on the Authentication tab, we'll select Local Database as the type of authentication service that the firewall should use. The type of authentication service you select determines the number and type of remaining options that the web interface presents to you. For information about these other options, please refer to the online help or to the PenOS 9.0 Administrator's Guide. A word of warning: you should not typically select None as the type of authentication service, because it would allow the user to log in with any password. You configure the Factors tab as part of multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication configuration is described and demonstrated later in this module. We'll use the Advanced tab and the Allow list to select specific users or user groups that the firewall can authenticate using this authentication service. As a convenience, rather than having to specify a long list of specific users and groups, you can select the keyword All. If you do not add any entries to the list, then the firewall cannot authenticate any users using this authentication service. The failed attempts option enables you to enter the number of consecutive failed login attempts allowed before the firewall locks the user account, thus preventing the user from accessing the firewall. By limiting the number of login attempts, you can help protect your network from brute force login attacks. The default value is 0, which allows an unlimited number of login attempts. The allowable range is 0 to 10, and we'll choose 3 for our environment. The lockout time option, which is in minutes, enables you to specify how long a user account is locked by the firewall after a user reaches the failed attempts value. The default value is 0, which means an account will be locked until an administrator unlocks the user account. The allowable range is 0 to 60. Using a value of 0 ensures that a firewall administrator is aware of multiple failed login attempts, but a 0 value also can create additional work for an administrator and it delays for the person trying to log in. We'll leave it at 0 and click OK to create the new profile. After you have added a user to the local user database and created an authentication profile that points to the local database, you can create a firewall administrator account that's based on the user's account in the local user database. To accomplish this, we'll browse to Device, Administrators, and we'll click Add. First, we'll type the user's name, which in our example has been Janet B. And we must type the name exactly as it appears in the local user database. Select the authentication profile that we just created that points to the local user database. Next, we'll select either a predefined or custom admin role profile. We'll select the dynamic role of super user, which provides Janet B with full administrative privileges on the firewall. If you select Use Only Client Certificate Authentication Web, then a username and password would not be required during login to the firewall's web interface. Instead, you would have to pre-distribute a user certificate, and the certificate would be required to authenticate the user to the firewall. If you select Use Public Key Authentication SSH, then an SSH key would be required during command line login to the firewall. You would have to generate an SSH public-private key pair on the user's system and then upload the SSH public key to the firewall. The user's public key would enable the firewall to authenticate the user's login without requiring the user to interactively enter a username and password. This configuration helps to protect usernames and passwords from being stolen using a network packet sniffer utility. We'll go ahead and click OK to create the new user account. This completes our demonstration of creating a new local user in the local user database and then elevating that user to a firewall administrator.